Our next panel, The Path to Peace, From Abraham to Cyrus Accords, will discuss the potential for a secular democratic Iran to bring about the Cyrus Accords to foster cooperation and stability. Please join me in welcoming panelists Victoria Coates, Vice President for National Security at the Heritage Foundation, and Saeed Ghasseminejad, Senior Iran and Economics Advisor at FDD. This panel will be moderated by Emily Schrader, an Israeli-American journalist for ILTV. Please join us in welcoming our speakers.
Hello, everyone. Difficult speech to follow, but we'll do our best here. Looking forward at the future. So as stated, we will be discussing the impact of the Abraham Accords and hopefully the future Cyrus Accords, something that, of course, would require a future secular democratic Iran, of course, in a broader regional peace framework. Such an agreement, as I'm sure all of you will agree, could really transform the entire Middle East, as well as the cooperation between Israel, Iran, and other Arab nations. So I want to start by asking a question that I'd love to actually hear a response from all of you on. What are the lessons that can be learned from the Abraham Accords that could be applied to the or a future Cyrus Accords?
Should we go by height? Or?
We can start with you. We can start with you.
From the wisest to the youngest.
Excellent. Thank you, Emily, and thank you to Nufti for putting together this conference. Wonderful to be with Saeed and with Lisa, two dear friends, and thank you, Dr. Ganji and Cameron. I've recently learned that we have now an intern at Heritage who came to us from Nufti, which would be the reverse of what my daughter did, which was go from Nufti to Heritage. So I hope this helps us increase our coordination and cooperation. So, you know, we've been thinking so much about the Abraham Accords. In recent days, we had the 4th anniversary of the wonderful ceremony on the West Lawn of the White House on the 15th of September. And of course, we're looking at the anniversary of October 7th coming up in a couple of weeks, which was one of the more brutal outlashings by the Islamic Republic. And so, you know, what I think we can take from the success of the Trump-era policies and, you know, getting to those historic peace deals is that this is possible. Even when we started the Trump administration, nobody thought that was possible. But, you know, as circumstances changed and the president began to think it was, you know, we went for it. So that can be done. And I'm sorry Len Kordakovsky isn't here with us today. Len and I've written about this. You know, the Cyrus Accords, very much in line with what the Crown Prince was just saying, this should be the offer to the people of Iran, that the United States is not your enemy, Israel is not your enemy. The three of us can form this extraordinarily strong trilateral relationship in security, yes, but also economics, technology, all the wonderful things at which our people excel, which is why we're sitting here on the stage together. So I think there are tremendous lessons learned there.
Thank you so much for having me. And as Victoria said, she and Len wrote about this extensively, and I had both of them on my show days after the idea was conceived. And it was, you know, such a logical progression from the Abraham Accords. And from the Abraham Accords, we learned many things. One of the most important things was that it completely busted the myth that path of peace or prosperity in the Middle East is going to be, you know, what stands in the way or the obstacle is the peace between the Palestinians and the Israelis. And what the Trump White House was able to do is to bypass that and say, you know, we can leave that issue on the side and we can focus on the evolution of the people of the Middle East. And the people of the Middle East showed us, not just through concept, not just through a piece of paper, which is what perhaps the JCPOA was, but actually through practice, that there can be private and public deals and relationships built between the people of the Middle East and not through their governments, but really that people want prosperity. More than anything, they want to have better lives. They you know, whether it's, you can, you know, credit social media or technology or just moving on. You know, when I started over 20 years ago at this point, writing and talking about things in the Middle East, I used to write about how I'm for sanctions in Iran. And so many Iranians would say, Vatan furush, tahrim bezaim mardom Iran. Yeah, are you going to, they call me a sellout. Are you going to sanction the people of Iran? How can you say that? But it has to be explained well. Why would we sanction the people of Iran? To actually get them a better life, to remove the regime. And now we see an evolution in the people of Iran who are calling for sanctions, who are calling for regime change. And we see this evolution within so many different societies. And the last thing I want to say is many people think that the Abraham Accords came about because of the Arab Spring, that it was a coming of age of the people in Arab nations. But the real Arab Spring was actually the Persian Spring of 2009, the Green Revolution, that actually told the world that the people of the Middle East, particularly led by the people of Iran, were ready for better lives, that they had outgrown from day one, but outgrown the patriarchal society or the dictatorial regimes that were leading them, and that's what led us to the Abraham Accords. So, ergo, the last bottom line, it should have been the first step, is to remove the regime and to actually have a relationship, which the Cyrus Accords would really fortify, a relationship between the people of Iran and the rest of the world.
I'd like to thank Nufti and thank all of you who are here. I know it's very difficult for you. It's my second appearance in like 1 hour. Believe me, it's hard for me too. While I have Yasmin and my wife, both of them have diagnosed me to be a little bit on a spectrum, so it's difficult for me too. I think what we have learned from the Abraham Accord is that if you think outside the box, you will have success, and I really hope that we take that lesson and employ it and enforce it on Iran policy. We really need to enforce it. And if we do that, I think a lot of good things that can happen. As the regime in Iran is quite weak now, and if we really go for a policy of regime change, not through military intervention, but through max pressure, max support, max defection, the regime in Iran can fall very quickly, very easily, and then the Middle East will be a much better place, and it would also help the US general policy in the world. A lot of people talked about the pivot to Asia, but if you have the regime in Iran in the Middle East, dominating the Middle East, how can you pivot to Asia? Because the regime in Iran, Putin's Russia, and the Communist Party in China, that's a new axis of tyranny. So my hope is that we take that lesson from the Abraham Accord and really use it for our Iran policy.
Now, we know that the Iranian people largely reject the propaganda of the Islamic Republic and this obsessive hatred and focus on the state of Israel. But what challenges do you think might arise in negotiating or implementing the Cyrus Accords? And more specifically, do you think that October 7th and what happened has set that further back, or perhaps even made it, come closer because of what we're seeing in the world kind of waking up? I'll start with you, Victoria.
Okay. I think I'd go off of something Saeed just said, which, is the very bad problems environmentally, economically, socially in Iran right now means they're not 100 feet high. But at the same time, they are receiving this backing from China. And China is inserting itself into the Iranian infrastructure in ways big and small. They are the primary architects of the very repressive regime that's being used to control the Iranian people through the internet, communications, all sorts of different, the Besiege, all sorts of different tools that they're using. Those are largely Chinese imports. And so when and if we have this opportunity, we all pray for, that Iran has new leadership that is more interested in peace than in destroying Israel, more interested in prosperity than chanting death to America. In this happy event, we're going to have a great deal of work to do just so we can simply talk to each other in a secure way, because China's not going to give this up lightly. I think China is thrilled with the progress they've made over the last 3.5 years, cementing these new relationships. Their relationship with North Korea, well known. And I actually consider North Korea a wholly owned subsidiary of the People's Republic. But Russia and Iran, to be this clearly out in the open and then facilitating the transactions between Russia and Iran, particularly for nuclear technology and weapon systems, is a huge problem. So I think one of the things we have to start thinking about is how do we extricate physically Iran from the grips of China? Who knows what kind of financial arrangements have been made. So that was something I would flag.
Lisa, did you want to add anything?
Sure. I actually want to talk about, Iran, the regime's being behind October 7th, not just militarily, but in terms of the propaganda war, and really taking advantage of that here in the United States, in not just the media, but when you look at the college campus protests, we know that the regime is behind that as well. And in that, the irony of it obviously being that they are supporting the useful idiots, the college students that are willing to carry a Hamas or Hezbollah flag here, but then college students back in Iran are not allowed to protest, and if they do, they risk their lives for it. And we try to, kind of underscore this juxtaposition. But the reason I bring this up is because the Iran regime knew the value of the Abraham Accords, and they were fearful that Saudi Arabia was going to be next, and they will be next. October 7th is a small, visual obstacle in the timeline of the Abraham Accords, because the Abraham Accords proved geopolitically and in terms of the relationships that were built how it will be the future of the Middle East. I did a documentary on the women life freedom movement inside Iran, and one of the scenes that we portrayed in that documentary was that in the middle of a university they put the flags of America and Israel, and they wanted the students to walk over it. 99.9% of the students walked around it. They wouldn't step on the Israeli flag or the American flag. Remember, from day one, 45 years ago, they came in. Khomeini said, we have two enemies, the big Satan, America, the little Satan, Israel, the Zionist project of America. The Iranian people are savvy. They have woken up to this. So October 7th, I think, will just be an obstacle. Even the Saudis have said, Prince Salman came out and said, my life is on the line. I get death threats, but I'm still interested in normalizing relations with Israel. So I think the time is ripe, and I think a lot of people, both inside Iran, looking at the Cyrus Accords, and in the other moderate Arab states and Saudi Arabia, are looking towards the future, and the continuation of the Abraham Accords and the Cyrus Accords will be the way of the future for the Middle East.
I believe that the very tragic event of October 7 actually forced Israel to liberate itself from the shackles which have been put by the West, especially the United States, on it. And over the last year, it has actually shown to us that the regime in Tehran and its proxies and partners are quite weak. So Israel almost has destroyed Hamas. It has been really battering Hezbollah, and Hezbollah is not responding. And it showed to everyone, the regime right now, it's really in a strategic impasse. It showed to everyone that the missile program, that they spend tons of money on it, it's really nothing if they don't have chemical or nuclear weapon installed on it. They couldn't even target one strategic target in Israel. And the reason that they are not doing anything now is that they know it. And Israel over the last week showed that, so we thought, okay, the regime in Tehran cannot do anything from Iranian soil. Hezbollah is going to do something. And Hezbollah cannot do anything. We have seen that over the last few days. And I think that tragic event actually, the only good thing that came out of it was to really help Israel to release itself from those shackles, and those shackles have been put, unfortunately, by Europe and the United States.
Well, the good news is that Hezbollah is having a very bad week. So may they have many more bad weeks in the future. Saeed, I wanted to ask you, we know that the Abraham Accords has brought about $2.5 billion in trade between Abraham Accords countries and the State of Israel. I'm wondering if you can speak a little bit about the potential economic and strategic benefits of the Cyrus Accords. What would that look like, and how can it benefit Israel, Iran, and all of the Middle East?
I think the benefit to Israel, Iran, and the Middle East is quite evident. The regime in Tehran is actually the main problem in the region. So all the bad things that are happening, most of them are caused because of the regime in Iran. Even the Sunni jihadist groups, they have been inspired by what happened in 1979, because the 1979 was the first time that they all saw that they can have a government, that they can control the state. So they learned a lot from it. But I want to make mention something about how it benefits the United States if the regime in Iran falls and if you have the Cyrus Accord. So the United States is the global superpower. It's a global hegemon. The main thing that any global, and being a global hegemon is actually helping us. It has its cost, but why is the US dollar is the currency of the world? It's because we are the global superpower. If we are not, the British found out that very quickly, that if you are not the global superpower, your currency is worth nothing. So the task of a global superpower is not to allow unfriendly regional hegemon rise. You have the regime in Iran wants to dominate the Middle East. You have Russia wants to dominate Eastern Europe, and you have China wants to dominate Eastern Asia. Iran is the weakest part of this axis of tyranny. It's really ready to fall. So if it falls, everyone correctly says we need to do a pivot to Asia. So if the regime in Tehran falls, you can actually pivot to Asia and to Russia a lot easier. And the second important benefit that we will have is in the war on terror. So the regime in Tehran is financing all these terrorist groups, a lot of them Shia, some of them are Sunni, like Al-Qaeda. And if it falls, the new regime in Tehran won't do that, and it actually will be a partner. And because you will have a trove of information of what they have done, it's much easier to fight these radical Islamist terrorist groups.
Victoria, do you have anything to add about how it might benefit the United States to have the Cyrus Accords?
Oh, I think it would be a massive benefit to the United States. I think the trade that has been achieved so far under the Abraham Accords would be dwarfed by what could potentially happen if Iran entered into the group. Because bear in mind, I mean, part of the trade, the positive trade numbers that have recently been reported, that encompasses a year of war in which that kind of trade was extremely difficult, but it kept going. And, in these very dark and turbulent times, and this has all been very, very hard to watch for the last year, one of the things that's given me significant hope is that the Abraham Accords have endured and even grown a little bit. And visiting with the UAE ambassador to Israel when I was there in July, a very hopeful moment. The fact that the Arab street has been rather remarkable for its calm over the last year. I mean, we've had much more protest and foment here in the United States than we've had in the Arab world. And so, I think that shows the durability and potential of these things. But to add a country of the scale and resources of Iran into the mix and the cultural history, and I was having a conversation last night about the kind of tourism that we could put together, between these countries, which have historically been stovepiped. So the upside is huge. The United States would participate in that as both a leader and as a partner. But I think it would be massively in our best interests, if for no other reason than a terrible irritant for almost 50 years would be removed.
Lisa. Lisa, is there anything you wanted to add about the potential benefits for the Middle East or for the United States?
Sure. I'm almost done with my PhD in this arena, but I will quote something my grandmother told me when I was 4 or 5 years old. And I said to her, چرا انقلاب کردن? Why did the Iranian people cause a revolution? And in one sentence, she said to me, because the West never wanted Israel and Iran to work together. And that really has stayed with me for such a long time. The Cyrus Accords would only be putting together such a natural and organic relationship that has always existed in the Middle East. Two modern, progressive countries that value women, that value human rights, that value prosperity and the economy, and how much we could get from that. To go back to your earlier question, did October 7th really deter the future of the Cyrus Accords or Abraham Accords? No, it made the case for it. It is absolutely, the October 7th, thank you. October 7th has a very different perspective in the Arab world. Yes, they will talk about how they support the Palestinians' rights. But do they want to inherit that problem? No. They see it as either you're for terrorism or you're against terrorism. They may not be Zionists, but they don't want terrorists on their soil. And that's exactly why the way of the future of the Middle East will be through that prosperity and to stop the Iran regime from marching forward in the region.
I would love to get an answer from all three of you on this question. How can the international community support the expansion of the Abraham Accords and, of course, eventually the Cyrus Accords as well? I'll start with you.
I think there is a great deal that can be done in terms of vocalizing support for the Iranian people and then doing non-kinetic things to give them the ability to communicate. So, we have the horrible missed opportunity of 2009 and the deliberate decision of the then Obama administration not to assist because they had already decided that they were going to work with the regime in Tehran and this was going to be their path towards diplomatic engagement. So that regime needed to stay in place. And to have millions of people pouring into the street crying for liberty was a little bit inconvenient. So that, looking back at that and what that could have meant is daunting, but we want to try not to miss these opportunities again. And so one of the things that I would hope if there were a new American administration that was more interested in this kind of work that we would really focus on is how do we export free speech? How do we give the folks in Iran who want to coordinate, who want to peacefully change their government, how do we give them those tools? This should not be beyond our means. If we can pipe internet into Ukraine during a war, we should be able to figure, it's a little bit more complicated for Iran, but we know it can be done. And it's easier now than it would have been 4 or 5 years ago. So figure out how you do these things that are not bombing Iran. I think one of the hard lessons for the United States is that imposing democracy militarily is an uphill climb, but when the people within a country want democracy and are taking matters into their own hands, for heaven's sakes, at least get out of their way and give them some tools that can help and support them. So that would be my feeling about it.
I'm just going to continue where Victoria left off, not give not to usher in political Islam as a viable government. We let the Taliban in Afghanistan. We look at Hamas in Gaza. 45 years ago, President Carter helped usher in this Islamic regime in Iran, toppling the Shah. I think these are huge mistakes. This is either a naivete or by design. We don't have time for that on this panel, but you guys have your own opinions, I'm sure. It has to be, the rhetoric and the deterrence has to start at the podium at the White House. We can't, in a previous panel, he talked about, stopping the Houthis in the Red Sea. That's too late. Why are they shooting at us to begin with? In very indirect ways, there was, we funded October 7th. During the Trump administration, there were actual charity boxes in Lebanon in the supermarkets to raise money for Hezbollah. Imagine from that going from October 8th, putting thousands of missiles into northern Israel from southern Lebanon. Look, it has to be the policy of the White House. We know exactly what needs to be done. We know that the region is ripe for it. And again, I'll say this so many times because it's such a crazy thought to believe that the people inside Iran understand the need for this type of policy in the Middle East more than the people in the White House do. And that's an absolutely crazy, it is, it's absolutely crazy. So there are a lot of useful idiots here that are doing the work of the mullahs right here in Washington, D.C.
I think we need to do max pressure, max support, max defection. There are things that we can do. On max pressure, for example, or since Biden took power, Tehran has exported 1.75 billion barrels of oil. That's, if you consider a 50% discount, that's like $122 billion. And their non-oil export actually reached its highest level since 1979. So basically, right now there is really no sanction. They don't enforce it. So we need to have that back. Zarif is on sanction list, and he's really not, he's not a foreign minister anymore. Why is he here? So they could easily tell him, we won't let you. That's another type of max pressure. The regime in Tehran has all these proxies. They are shooting at us in the Middle East, and we really don't respond. It's not that we can't, it's that we don't want to do it. So if you actually respond to them, that's a type of max pressure on them that we have seen. Israel is doing it. And Israel is much weaker than the United States. And Israel is not paying a high price for actually responding to them. Israel paid a high price when it didn't respond to them. So that's the max pressure. FDD has a long list of what to do on max pressure. The second part is max support. FDD and Nufti together put memos on that. One, what Victoria said about communication, that's very important. The other one, what Lisa said, you need to show support. Rhetorical support should come from the top. So the previous administration was very good at that. This administration, they have actually, so they had a very good, the previous administration had a very good social media operation. This new administration came in, literally destroyed it. So when you look at the reach, they literally destroyed it. There are tons of things that we can do on max support. You can go and read our memo, I don't want to take your time. And then you need to do max defection. You need to help those people who want to defect from the regime, vet them, and then connect them to opposition so they can work together to bring down the regime. What we do now is that the people who are in the regime and they are loyal to the regime, we help them to bring their money out, we help them to infiltrate all of our institutions, and we help them to lobby for the regime. So if we change those things, I think, as I said, the regime is very weak these days. And its fall is not something it's not impossible. I think it's very possible that if we do these things, if we help the Iranian people, the regime can fall very easily.
I just wanted to add one quick thing I learned today. We were honored to host the governor of Alaska, Mike Dunleavy, for an energy discussion and a lunch. And one of the things he told us is that the current administration has leveled 66 punitive actions against the state of Alaska for energy production, which is significantly more than all of the actions that they've leveled on the Islamic Republic of Iran. So, I mean, that's where they're putting their maximum pressure. You can tell by the numbers. And the governor has a card with the 66 actions if you're interested.
Shifting gears just a little bit, obviously the Islamic Republic has been very active even in recent months in the disinformation campaign, and radicalization in general is something that they actively promote, in particular on US campuses as of late. I wanted to ask you, given that the Abraham Accords had such an element of de-radicalization in some of these Arab countries, I mean, we have Holocaust education that was introduced into curriculum for the first time in some of these countries. How can de-radicalization, what part will that play in the Cyrus Accords, and how can that help advance peace regionally and globally? I'll start with you, Lisa.
Okay. What's interesting is that de-radicalization has to happen here first. and then move to the Middle East. What's happened in the Middle East over the last decade is de-radicalization. You see, a lot more among people, I should say, not, the regimes are different. But I think there's such a profound, and I think my co-panelists alluded to it as well, influence campaign by the regime. And I said this at a talk the other night, and I'll say it here. You see other philanthropists, whether they're Jewish or American or Swedish or whatever they are, when they give money to a university, they put their name on the outside of the building. When you see the Chinese, the Qataris, the Iran regime, what do? They go inside the building. They want to control minds. They want to control hearts. They want to control the chairman. They want to control which professors get hired. I know this because I had a front seat at the jihadification of America for the last 20 years. At Rutgers University, I was a Middle Eastern Studies major. That's where they start, in the Middle Eastern Studies departments, because there are many useful idiots there. Then I went on to get my master's in journalism. Where do they go next? The journalism schools, of course. These are the future journalists that will be controlling the newsrooms and therefore controlling the media. It's unbelievable what goes on in America, and it hasn't just been since October 7th. I used to be an undercover investigative reporter, and I used to wear my keffiyeh and go on college campuses when they would have these jihadi speakers. And a series of talks that I attended undercover was in the UC school system, UC Irvine, UCLA, where they would actually, and again, I say UC, why? Because these are taxpayer-funded state schools. And they would have jihadi speakers stand in the middle of campus telling the students to cause jihad, to raise jihad against America. This is maybe 10, 12 years ago. We tried to bring this to the attention of the schools. The schools didn't want to hear it. They filed it away as either they don't want to deal with it or it's free speech, right? It's free speech. Fast forward, it's not surprising to me that we now have Hezbollah and Hamas flags on US campuses. The jihadis, the Iran regime, this element, the Qataris, they have been working at it for 20 years. It's just many of us that have just woken up since October 7th and really give credit to, oh, it's October 7th, it's what's going on because of the war. No, it's not because of the war. This is an influence campaign. There are people working in the Pentagon at this moment who have security clearance and send emails to Javad Zarif saying, what can I do for you? It was brought to the attention of the government, and they said, we're okay with it. Then there was more pressure, and they said, we're going to look into it. She still has security clearance, and she still works for the Pentagon. This is a problem. This is a problem, and until we correct this radicalization inside America, we're not going to fix anywhere else or be involved in the Middle East. The Middle East might go on without us, and I think that's a nod to the Cyrus Accords and why it's so important for the people of the Middle East to go forward, and hopefully the United States under a new administration will wake up, will come to their senses about where we should be standing.
Saeed, do you have anything you want to add?
I'm going to be careful. I don't want to be FOIA'd and sued again. So, but I agree with Lisa. I think we need to radicalize our own universities here, our own institutions here. And as far as the Iranian people are concerned, I think they have been de-radicalized a lot over the last 45 years. The majority of Iranian, I mean, not the small minority who are radical Islamist or radical leftist. And you heard like 15 years ago, they chanted no to Gaza, no to Lebanon, I give my life for Iran. And they just chanted, shove the flag of Palestine up here. And in between, they have been chanting, I'm not defending it, I'm reporting it, that they have been chanting death to Palestine. So that's the result of what the regime has done. That's the result of, if you go back to the history of the Islamic Revolution, who was the first foreign dignitary who came to Iran? Yasser Arafat. And he has been embraced by all the factions of the Islamic Revolution, supporters of Khomeini, backers of Mossadegh, members of the Marxist Fedayeen, members of the Islamist Marxist Mujahideen Khalq, MK. And so Iranians see that. Iranians know that this Palestinian terrorists, actually, if you again go back and read the history, what these groups themselves wrote, These Palestinian terrorists played a very significant role. It's not conspiracy theory. It's in the books that these groups themselves wrote. Trained the radical Islamists and radical Marxists who actually led the Islamic Revolution, connected them to the Soviet Union, to Gaddafi, to Assad, and then promoted them. So that's why, that's one of the reasons that the Iranian people right now are so much philo-Semitic, unlike their own regime. And there are other reasons, like if you go back to our history, go back, like Iranian Jews have been living in Iran for more than 2,000 years. So we have a very ancient bond between the Iranian people and the Jewish people. And what you have seen over the last 4 decades, it's not in our DNA. This is something that happened because of the action of what the Shah of Iran called the Black and Red Alliance, the radical Islamists and the radical leftists, and that's what you actually see today in the United States. You see it in Europe, so they are coming for you now.
Well, I'd like to very much associate myself with both of my colleagues' comments. I mean, what's going on here, you know, if there's a silver lining to October 7th, it's that it's been revealed, and the scope and the scale of it cannot be denied, and that it's a huge problem we have to get after. I wanted to make a little bit of a tangential point, though, about de-radicalization that has to take place, and that is with the Palestinians. You notice, I mean, there has been this effort to differentiate between the Palestinians and Hamas, and then you've gotten the fact that the international community, led by the United Nations, one additional sort of blight on their reputation is the institutionalization of radicalization that has taken place under UNRWA now for decades. And that is what produces October 7th. You don't make 1,500 people that vicious simultaneously without working on it for some time. That's a big project. And so there's a reason the Egyptians won't even take the women and children from Gaza. They're like, absolutely not. The Jordanians, absolutely not. The reason for that is that the entire population is severely radicalized. It's a disease, it's a sickness. Now, there is good news in that, as we were saying, there have been very strong de-radicalization programs, particularly after 9/11 in, say, Saudi Arabia, also in Morocco. And Morocco, an Abraham Accords country, stands by, ready and willing to try to help. And given the king's position in Islam, that is a position of authority that could carry some weight with them. And this would be a generational change, and it would be a lot of work. But I think for those who claim to support the Palestinian cause, this is the only thing that will save these people from this endless cycle of violence and misery. And you know, that would be the project I would hope we could look at.
I know we have some questions from the audience, so is there anyone who would like to ask? We have a couple more minutes.
We have one question from the audience that was submitted. This is to Saeed specifically, or to anyone else in the panel who'd like to answer. What action items from maximum support specifically should be a priority and can gain support from Congress to introduce legislation?
I think the communication is very important, very easy. It's hardware. It's being taken care of to a certain degree right now in Iran through market mechanism. So you have these Starlink devices being used in Iran. As more and more these devices are going to be used, I think there may be Starlink may feel it's going to have problem with the U.S. government, with the OFAC. So I think that's something we need to think about right now. The other one is like, if we can actually enforce our sanctions, then use the revenue. It has happened in some instances that the U.S. government confiscated these tankers, then sold it. So the suggestion is let's use this revenue to fund, for example, a labor strike fund. So if we want to bring down the regime, having labor strikes, it's something very useful. It can really, if you can actually have fund like 4 to 6 months of labor strikes, in key strategic sectors, it becomes much more easier to bring down this regime. And we are not saying that the US taxpayer should fund that. Let's enforce the sanctions, use it to fund this. I think these are like two items that can be done. There are a lot more like really using the rhetorical support coming from the top. It doesn't have really any cost. So these are like, as I said, these would be my top three for now.